Hello everybody. Well, just now I'd like us to write some code. Let's take a look. In the last video we'd explored this sketch and I'd made the argument that there are 3 columns, and you could see in this drawing that there's also 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. You would think with 3 columns up and down and 4 rows that there would be 12 boxes. Alright, let's get the language straight. Grid container is the whole grid. Grid items are the separate boxes in the grid. So if you look at this drawing, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, one would expect 3 here and here. That would be 12 total grid items. 12 boxes. Grid items are the boxes that make up the container, the grid container. Thing is, the first row, it's true. There is 1 grid item to fall into each column. The second row is the same, 1 grid item per column. But the last one, the grid item, spans across all 3 columns. So this is a kind of special one that I would like to add today. And then it goes back to the earlier pattern. So I would still say this grid is 3 columns by 4 rows, even though one of the rows has a special exception going. Now, I'm going to be supplying these in our class assets, so they'll be restaurant 1, CSS restaurant1.html, and a little page, a little file called extra parts. If you want to join along with me, you should get to that folder, open up Sublime in a browser, and get these open in Sublime. So restaurant1.html has nothing in it really. All it has is the usual tags, including a link in the head section to today's style sheet. So the body's empty. I want to start simply. The grid that we've been talking about would begin div class equals grid dash container. Now, this could be written in any number of ways, but we're going to go with grid dash container. Then you go down pretty far and close it. Now, if the entire website is going to be this grid, then you could take this tag that began in the first available spot after body and close it as the last thing before the body closes. In other words, the entire page is going to be in this div called grid container. Now, if you look inside it, the top row is clearly going to be 3 divs. So what I'd like to do is start indenting. I'm going to write a comment, and I'm going to call it row 1. The comment isn't technically necessary to make this work, but it will help us stay sane. Div. I want to just begin with an automatic habit. The big div is grid container, and all the small grids, all the small divs are grid item. So row 1 is going to have 1, 2, 3 grid items. For right now, I'm just going to write picture, and I'm going to close up that div. I'm going to go beneath it. This is the one that's going to have the text in it. I'm going to write div class equals grid item. And I'll write text, and I'll close it. Alright. Then I've got one more div, and this one is also grid item, because they're all going to be grid item, just about. Here's where the price goes, and I don't want to forget to close it. All right, now if you look at it, I've got one div, and that's the picture. I've got a second div, that's going to be the text, and I got a third div, that's going to be the price. Now that's a complete row. Don't be fooled by this closing div, because this is the container here that has to wrap around them all. If we lose this, then the whole container will break. All right, I'm going to stop with that and save it. Now, grid container has to be made on the style sheet, and it's going to have to be spelt the right way, and so is grid item. Those are the two main items. So let's go over to the style sheet and see what we have. You can see I prepared 3 classes because I would like for you to focus on these 3. The first 2 are standard. The third one, well, you'll see. Let's focus on grid container. The whole show actually starts because of this one line. Display grid. Thing is, the grid container class depends on at least 2 things inside of its style. Display grid, which I mentioned, and is grid template columns. So back to the style sheet, and I'm going to add grid template columns, and I want to designate the 3 columns that we've been discussing, and I have some choices, but I think I'm going to begin with the automatic measurement. So I have 3 measurements to make if I want those 3 columns. If I put in a 4th now, it's going to be a 4-column grid. I want to remind you, this is our goal, and we're looking for these 3 columns. So here I am in the code, and here I'm going to change these, but temporarily I'm going to let them split the space as best they can. So I want to save this. I want to take a quick trip to the browser and refresh it, and you can see the words just moved across and we're off the ground. I think what I'd like to do next is change the size of grid container and add a border to the grid item so we could see what we're doing. So I'm going to go into grid container here, and I'm going to give it a width. And this is a number that I've worked with a lot, a very common width when someone does want to create a reliable width that works on most computers. Of course, in the future, we're going to learn how to change that so it could work on small devices. But I'm going to start there. Also, I'm going to add a little bit of code that is going to center it for us, which might be quite nice. So I gave it a width. I'm telling you to center with this very interesting line, and I'm also going to add a border just around the grid so it's easy to see what we've got. And I'm going to make that a 1 pixel red border. And let's see what that looks like. So we've got it centered, as I said, and it's at 960 pixels, but it stays in the middle. So even on a wide screen, it's going to stay in the middle, which is really nice. That's pretty good. We got the border so we can see, you know, what's going on. What I'd like to do next is go give grid item some border of its own, because this way we could see each separate box. Remember that in our columns, in our 3 columns, each column gets 1 box. The next row also will get 3 boxes, and that's how the columns form. But let's get a look by assigning a border there. And I'm going to try the same kind of border and see how that goes. Also make it 1 pixel. But I'm going to make this blue. I'm looking for colors that are just easy for us to spot. And now you could see the borders inside. Also, you could see that the content is touching the edges of the box, and it may be a good idea to give it some padding. So I'm going to do that. And let's see what 10 pixels looks like. Alright, that's looking quite a bit nicer. I'm not going to be changing heights just now. We have some other things to do before we could talk about the best way to change height. Right now, I just want to point out some simple stuff about what we've got. Grid container told us to have columns and never mention rows. And yet it says that we should have 3 columns. What happens then when we actually give it more than 3? Okay, again, we told it there'd be 3 columns. Will it automatically start another row if I move forward? Okay, what would happen if we just copied the whole first row? Let's take it, including the comment, and Command C. Don't lose it. Go down a line, or even 2, and paste it again. Now I want to neaten up as I go, and I'm going to change that comment so it says row 2. So all I really did was copy this row here and put it here. And I just want to remind you one more time, don't lose this div at the bottom, because these are the separate items. This one closes the container. All right, let's save it, and we'll get a look. So you could see, if we just wanted these, it would be easy. If you want to, you can go ahead and add one more. All right. Okay. I would like to squeeze in just one last thing. What if we wanted the next row to be 1 box? Okay. I'm going to handwrite this one. Just get this so we could see that. And I'm going to write row 4. And I'm going to say div class equals. I'm going to put grid item in there. But if I really wanted it to cross the entire row so that it's by itself, I'm going to have to add more than that. For now, I'm just going to put in some text to remind me what I'm doing. Alright, and I'm going to close up that div. Now at first, I'm not going to see anything too satisfying, right? It just went 1 column's worth. So what I'm going to have to do is take this idea over here a little bit further. Okay, so what I want to address is the need for us to span across the separate grid items. So right now, each item falls right in its column and its row. So everything looks like a tic-tac-toe board or some kind of graph where everything's perfectly even. But what if you wanted a headline to go straight across? Now we have a 3-column arrangement, and I want to give you a look at something to help us figure this out. So as I said, we've got 3 columns, 1, 2, 3 columns, and we have 4 rows. Now these numbers here don't represent the number of columns at all. They represent the lines coming down from the column. So this column line goes straight down. That's number 1. It's way on the left edge. Here's the second column line. Here's the third column line. In other words, you can imagine these lines going from top to bottom. Now we're going to use those because, for example, this little thing that looks like a bowl spans from column line 1 to column line 2, which is the default. Sorry about that. If I wanted the same box to span 2 columns worth, it would go from column line 1 to column line 3. Thing is, we want this down here where I've written desserts to go from column line 1 all the way across to this line. And I'll just check my chart and I see it's column line 4. This is one of the reasons why I highly recommend that you draw first. Don't even try to draw this in your head. You could see mine is nearly a scribble, but it's given me the ideas I need to make all the decisions in my code. Plus, right now, it's letting me see the blue marked column lines. I'm not concerned with the row lines yet, but they also have numbers. So every single line that separates the grid is what we want. So I'm going to use these numbers, and I'm going to tell this box here to go all the way from column line 1 to 4. All right. The next thing I want to show you, if you take a look right here at my HTML, line 41 is where I wanted to start this new row, this special row that's supposed to go all the way across. Currently that div is using the same class called grid item. And what I really want to do is activate this thing that I called horizontal span. This one doesn't really have a typical name, so I called it horizontal span just to help us understand what it's going to do. It's going to span right across things and heading horizontally across like a huge headline. Now, to make it easier for all of us, I included in today's assets something called extra parts. And these are the extra parts that interest me because I don't feel like typing right now and I want to make my point. All right, okay. So you'll notice I've created this class called horizontal span, and we typically just type in there. I kept my extra parts around, so I just copied it. The grid column start, that's about those column lines we were talking about. Number 1 was the left edge of the document. In our particular drawing, the right side was column line 4. So if you have a look with me, here's what I'm talking about. Here is the start, line 1. Remember, that's for desserts over here. And I go straight across here, and it ends on column line 4. So that's what the code is saying. It says, all right, when I use this class, tell that particular div that it should start all the way on the left and end all the way on the right. So I'm going to save that. And the thing is, my HTML doesn't know anything about this particular class called horizontal span. It's not been used. There's grid container and plenty of grid item. So let's take a look. This is the div that I'm talking about. It already has grid item in it. What I'm going to do is make a space and use another class. Now, we've never done that before. Notice they're sharing quotes. I've got the one class that all the other plain old grid items have, but this one's supposed to go straight across, so I added the class that tells it to do that, which I just called horizontal span. So there it is. On line 42, I changed that one div. This is going to be all by itself. The other rows have 3 divs in it, but this is going to have one really wide one. I'm going to save that, and let's get a look in the browser. Whoops. There it goes, straight across. Nice. Okay, so I've got a little grid, but it doesn't look anything like a website because there's no content. And if we take a quick look at the sketch again, right, we could see that that left column is really mostly there to show us the food. The middle is going to have text and the right prices. I want to say something about the left column and the images. I need to figure out what size they should be before I go to Photoshop and before I write the code for those images. So let's just talk about that left side column and how big it ought to be. Okay, where do we even begin? You may remember that we set the whole grid container to 960 pixels wide. 960 pixels has been a popular width for web designers for quite some time. So if the whole thing's 960, then all three columns together are 960. And one of the reasons that number got so popular is it's very easy to divide. So for example, if all three columns were 320 pixels wide, they'd surely be 960. So I can do that. I want to make a point about how that might work. Okay, so if I wanted the columns to be even, they would be 320 pixels each, together equaling the total 960. So let's say this is a bowl of soup over here. Maybe I do want it to be more. It's more than 1/3 because the pictures are very attractive. And I can take it as far as I want. Remember, I've got 960 pixels to work with. So if I was going to do half, that would be 480. That might be much. I think I'm going to go with a 400 width and a 300 height, a slightly horizontal image. And let's see if you like the way that it looks. 400 pixels wide by 300 pixels tall. So I'm going to go to my original images folder and see what I've got. And I think I better make myself an images folder in here too. And that's where I'm going to put the finished images. Every website has to have one of those. All right, I got it waiting. I'm going to go ahead and open up one of the soups, this one called carrots, in Photoshop. I want to point out that I made sure in advance that these were going to be very large. So I'm going to the crop tool. I'm setting it to width by height by resolution. And I've decided I'd like to try a 400 px. Don't forget the px, 400 px width. And to get a slightly horizontal look, I'm going to make the height a little bit shorter, 300 px, which happens to be roughly the same shape as the original. I'm setting the resolution to 72. If you're joining with me, which is a great idea, so I'm trying 400 pixels wide by 300 pixels tall. And of course, I'm doing 72. I could crop it differently if I want. As you can see, I've got a very large image to work with. So it gives me some choices about how I want to crop it. I'm going to take it. All right. And then I'm going to save it. And I'm doing a save as. And I want to get to today's images folder. And I'm going to give it a new name. Now, just like we were doing in school, I'm going to give it simple names. For example, carrot soup 400 times 300.jpg. And I'm going to save that. I'm going to set it to medium and JPEG options. Yeah, I think I'm going to take a peek first and make sure it's in there. Okay, it's in my folder. Now I'm going to go to my code. So all I did was crop it to the size that I want to see. And one of the things I want to show you is how that's going to affect the entire layout of the grid. So I'm going to row 1. And remember, that first thing I wanted to see is a picture in row 1. If you forgot, here's the Photoshop image. Row 1. First column is just showing us a picture of food. All right, let's get back to the code then. So here's row 1, and here's the first box. Right? Remember, only this is row 1. I got the comments to help me not lose it. So it said picture there as a placeholder, and now I'm actually going to write the code that we got to know. Image source, and in my images folder, and I called it carrot. Well, you know what? I called it carrot soup 400 by 300 JPEG. I copied that before since I have such a bad memory. And I'm going to leave alt out and any kind of fancy CSS right now because I'd like to see what would happen. Let's save it, go to the browser, and have a look. All right. Also want to take control of the width of that column. I think I just don't like the width of the column. If that's the case, I'm going to go back to my code and start to control it. Now all those sizes are in the CSS, so I'm going to go right there. And I want to bring us back to this line. Back in the grid container, that was the first time we told it we wanted 3 columns. At that time, we didn't know how wide we wanted them. Thing is, currently, I've decided that that left side column should be just about the size of the photo itself. The photo, I believe, we just made 400 pixels wide. And so I'm going to change the entire column to 400 pixels wide. What's interesting is, will that work since there is padding inside of every box? Maybe I should get a little bit bigger. Let's see. All right, it's sticking out over there. So I think I'm going to make that box a little bit bigger just to work with the padding. And that might take some play, but remember, the way I wrote it, the padding's going on both sides. So it's going to be 10 pixels on the left and 10 pixels on the right, producing an extra 20 pixels of space. Now you could play with that number. Again, I'm basing it on the original width of the Photoshop file. Let's get a look and see what that looks like. I'm going to refresh, and there you have it. So that's kind of the gist of it. I do want to point out, though, that naturally we want to really finesse it and style text and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to do some very rapid changes right now to get it to a place that I'm a little happier with. And we'll see what you think. That I would prefer a different photo of the food or a different arrangement, so I'm trying something different, and I'm cropping this photo directly right back to the images folder. I'm going to come over here and take a look. Right, different kind of look. I think I'm going to go do some quick stuff to the code. Again, these are just thoughts. Do I really want borders all over the place? I don't know. I'm going to see what happens if I take this one off. Right, it's a simpler kind of look, and I'm eventually going to take that off completely. I'm going to go into the HTML and make some points. So here is the first box that's for the image. This is the second box that's for text. So I'm going to say carrot soup. I'm giving it a big headline there, and I haven't really spent any time styling it. And maybe there's going to be a little paragraph of text also in that box. So I'm just going to do some quick lorem ipsum there, and this is all inside of that one div. I'm going to save it. You don't have to, join me on this. I'm just trying to make my point how it works. So I kind of figured out how much of the width it wants. Of course, I could control it. I could figure out exactly how much room there is for it. And I may just take a quick look at that. It's the CSS that controlled the width all along, right? 960. And I'm telling that first box to be 420 pixels, which basically means I have 540 pixels left. So I don't know. What would happen if I made this one a mere 400 pixels? That's the one that's holding the text. And that looks a little bit better. And I'm going to go ahead and pop in a price in the HTML. So here's the price. And just because I don't have much time, I'm going to put the price in an H1 also. And save that. Oops. And I'm going to get a look. And of course, there's a lot more that I would like to do. I'd like to style, etc., etc. But I think I want to show you what would roughly it might look like if there were more rows just like that. So I'm going to take that first row, and I'm going to copy it over this second row of dummy. and the third row too, because later on I'll just swap out the pictures and the text. Let's see what that looks like. Now it's getting closer. If I went to the style sheet now, we would see that I have a lot of different opportunities. I could give the container a background color if I want, and pretty sure light blue works. There we go. And not that I like it. I could change that top margin, which is feeling kind of cramped. I could take out the blue borders on the grid items, because I don't feel like I need them quite as much anymore. They were mostly there to help me organize. And you could see, little by little, this is picking up. I've got some text on the bottom here in that one very wide div that we created. So maybe this should just be a paragraph, and I could style that later. And you could see the kind of look that I'm acquiring. There's a lot that I could do. I could even take these ones that have horizontal span and change their color. If they were all the spanning divs are going to share color, I could surely go right ahead and assign it right here. Now I know I'm racing right now, and I'm doing that mostly to give people some quick ideas. I'm not really intending for anyone to follow along with that. This is basically where I'm heading now, is just seeing what I could do now that I've done all that hard work. And I'm going to imagine, say, a whole bunch of more rows like these top 4 that I have. And of course, if I was prudent, I would go change all the comments. Now right now I'm not going to take that time. I just want to show you what that would look like. And I'm going to try something a little bit fancy very quickly here. If I could find my eyedropper, I'm going to borrow this color and go into the color picker. And I guess what I would like to find is the hex code. Here we go. Here's some hex code. And I'm going to use it in my style sheet. I'm just going to add a quick body tag so I can give it a color. Don't want to forget that pound sign. I'm going to save this, come back and refresh it. So you can see, I definitely need to baby this, but it's off the ground. You know, I could style my image tag. Maybe they should have borders. I'll find much better colors and much better fonts. I could put a big headline or anything I want above this grid. But there you have it. And that's about all I got for today. So be sure to come to the Zoom meeting where I could tell you more. Bye till then.